START with Russia. But this week's expiration of New START pushes the world closer to the edge. These are agreements that facilitate data exchanges and put American inspectors on the ground at Russian nuclear facilities. That verification has provided years of insight into things like the number of warheads on each Russian missile, reducing guesswork on our military planning. And I think we can all agree nobody wants to be guessing with nukes. Russia suspended verification during its war of aggression against Ukraine, but recently has expressed interest in extending tenets of New START. However, the Trump administration has been unwilling to use U.S. economic, diplomatic, and military leverage to advance an agreement that would restore verification and help keep Americans safe. So, Admiral Richard, you were the commander of U.S. Strategic Command. Do arms control agreements like New START strengthen transparency and predictability with Russia?
Senator, as I testified back when I was on active duty, arms control agreements that involve all parties, which in this case would include China, Russia, and the United States, include all weapons, all types of weapons, and have verification mechanisms like you just described with consequences for failing to uphold the agreement, do enhance strategic deterrence and national security.
Thank you. You know, the State Department knows why these verification regimes are important. It said in its annual report that it cannot confirm Russian compliance without on-site inspections that this kind of verification permits. Inspectors can conduct short notice, surprise visits, look at things like how many warheads are on a missile. And without that visit, we might get lucky. We might be able to spot one from satellite, but we wouldn't know if it could hit one target or multiple targets. And that means we're guessing. We usually have to assume the worst, and our enemies do the same. And before you know it, we are in a more dangerous arms race. Ms. Gottmiller, you were the chief negotiator for New START and then responsible for doing the annual compliance reports. If we lose verification due to New START's lapse, can current intelligence capabilities fully plug that hole?
Ma'am, the New START monitoring regime, verification regime, has not been implemented since February of 2023. You mentioned that in your remarks. And so we have been dependent on our national technical means of verification. I marry that with the compliance report that is now coming out of the Department of State, where they say that essentially they see that the New START limits continue to be maintained by the Russian Federation. Now, they have raised a concern about whether the Russians might be going over the warhead, operationally deployed warhead limit, but that is a concern. They haven't been able to confirm that, and I'll be frank with you, I do think that it may be associated with the so-called deployed and undeployed launcher limit. Mm-hmm. We have an undeployed launcher, a possibility where if they were notifying us, they could tell us that they were removing certain platforms, SSBNs, for example, from deployment, and therefore that would account for if there is some kind of differential in the number of deployed warheads. So I just use this as an example to say that these negotiated verification measures are really important. It's on-site inspection is vital, but with us, our ability to notify each other of exactly what we're doing. Right. And we did that under New START. There were 25,000 notifications of the movements of our strategic forces exchanged on a regular basis.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to slip in one more question quickly if I can, and that is, if the U.S. gives up on restraining Russia's nuclear arsenal through a new deal, does that make China more or less likely to come to the table?
I think the Chinese will only come to the table if the United States is engaging with Russia, in my opinion.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. You know, the United States should be using its position now and using all of its economic and diplomatic powers to try to get Russia to the table, ultimately to try to get China to the table. I think it is a mistake to let New START expire and to walk away from an agreement that gives us valuable intelligence information. We need to do better. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Morrison,